courthouse was still buzzing with heated voices when a tall, broad-shouldered woman in her early 50s stepped onto the worn marble floor, her brown leather shoes carrying her forward with a resolute calm. Her name was Marie Stone, and although her face showed faint lines of experience, her eyes were steady as steel. She didn't look afraid. She didn't look angry. She simply looked ready to face an onslaught from a world that had, until moments ago, dismissed her entirely. "Order! Order!" the judge roared, pounding his gavel so hard that a few spectators jerked in their seats. In that moment, all attention turned to Marie. She stood alone in front of the wooden defense table, her hands resting there lightly, her posture straight as a soldier's. Across the aisle, the prosecuting attorney, an impeccably groomed man in a crisp suit, smirked. "Your Honor, this woman is here with some wild claim of a critical mistake. She insists she has evidence that will overturn a verdict from last week's hearing." Skeptical murmurs erupted around the room. Onlookers craned their necks to see what could possibly be so important that the courtroom had been called back in for an emergency session at dawn. In the first row, a few reporters whispered to one another, cameras resting on their laps, uncertain if they should start recording or wait for something truly sensational to happen. The judge glowered, his gray eyebrows drawn low. He gestured toward Marie. "Stone, let me be perfectly clear. You barge into my courtroom at this unholy hour. You file an urgent petition that claims an innocent person has been sent to prison on account of a judicial oversight. I trust you realize the gravity of that accusation." The entire courtroom fell silent as the judge's voice reverberated off the walls. The hush was electric. People were expecting this woman, who was neither a practicing attorney nor an elected official, to crumble under that stern gaze. But Marie merely inclined her head politely. "Your Honor, I'm painfully aware of how unusual this is," she said, her voice firm yet respectful. "But there's a man serving time for something he did not do. If we don't correct that, then we might as well surrender to injustice without a fight." Laughter emerged from somewhere in the seats behind her, from a group of curious law students or perhaps some bored locals. It didn't ruffle Marie, she merely lifted her chin a little higher. The prosecuting attorney smirked again. "Stone, you have no legal credentials," he drawled. "Are we truly expected to believe you discovered something that a team of highly qualified attorneys and investigators missed? That you, a former data analyst of all things, caught an error with your rummaging around in the system?" Morin's gaze swept across him. It was not a look of anger, but of iron determination. "Don't we say in this country that truth can come from anywhere?" The judge raised a brow. "And exactly what is this so-called mistake in the court's ruling, Ms. Stone?" A hush fell again. Even those who'd been mocking her fell into expectant silence. The words seemed to resonate with an audience that was primed for drama. The breath of the onlookers stilled. One of the reporters clicked her phone to record a voice memo. Marie let out a slow breath. "The DNA evidence used to convict Harold Davis last week was contaminated." She placed a stack of documents on the defense table. "And I can show you precisely how, and by whom, it was tampered with." Instantly, the hum of astonishment spread across the courtroom. The prosecuting attorney went pale for half a second, then recomposed himself. "That's a serious accusation." "Serious and correct," Marie said, her fingers tightening on the papers. "I spent 8 weeks analyzing lab results, reading thousands of lines of digital logs from the official evidence tracking system, cross-referencing them with federal data. The result is conclusive. Someone altered the timestamps so that the chain of custody would point to Harold Davis's guilt, and it appears the court either missed it or chose to ignore it." The judge's gavel smacked once. "Let's see these documents." As the bailiff came forward to collect the papers, the tension in the room surged. It felt like the entire chamber was collectively holding its breath. A stray cough echoed. The prosecutor's smirk had vanished, replaced by a concerned frown. Everyone understood that if Marie Stone were telling the truth, the entire verdict might collapse. And if she was lying, she was about to commit a crime in open court. No one expected the abrupt burst of doors at the back. Two uniformed officers charged inside, faces taut, guns unholstered. Gasps fluttered through the room like startled pigeons. Cameras rose, shutters clicked. The judge pounded his gavel, demanding order, but the officers ignored him. "Step away from that table," one shouted, pointing a trembling gun at Marie. A few people yelped in shock. Even the judge seemed momentarily frozen, unsure of what was happening. Then his voice thundered, "Put those weapons away. Who do you think you're aiming at?" One officer kept his gun on Marie while the other addressed the bench. "We've got orders to detain Ms. Marie Stone for unauthorized entry into a restricted federal database. She's been hacking into the system, Your Honor." Chaos. The pews erupted with shouts, half the courtroom standing as though pulled by a single string. The judge hammered his gavel with wild fury. "I said order!" But it was no use. The officers rushed forward. They twisted Marie's arms behind her back, snapping on handcuffs. She let out a sharp cry of pain, but forced herself to stay calm. The humiliation of being cuffed in front of everyone, reporters, prosecutors, the judge, fueled a spark in her chest. As they dragged her away from the defense table, the prosecuting attorney snatched the documents she'd left behind. He waved them at the judge. "Illegal evidence, Your Honor, obtained by hacking. This entire motion is void." "No," Marie spat, her voice quivering with urgency. "It's the truth, Your Honor. DNA evidence was falsified and Davis is innocent. Listen to me." The officer yanked her back. She locked eyes with the judge for one blazing second before the heavy doors slammed shut behind her. Reporters chased after them, cameras rolling, trying to capture every snippet of drama. Muffled shouting trailed into the corridors beyond. Inside the courtroom, a hush followed, thick with tension and unspoken questions. Marie could still hear the echoes of that final silence as she was led into a police cruiser outside. Rain, gentle and persistent, drummed against the hood. The yard around the courthouse was small and puddle-strewn. A few watchers stood on the sidewalk, huddling under umbrellas. One recognized Marie from the local news, snapping pictures on her phone. Others just looked on, uncertain whether to pity or accuse her. "Let me guess," Marie said softly, glancing at the officer. "This is where you lecture me about interfering in official business?" The officer was silent for a moment, gripping the steering wheel tight as the cruiser pulled into city traffic. "You're in serious trouble, Miss Stone." She slumped against the seat, handcuffs digging into her wrists. "I didn't do anything to harm anyone. All I did was open a few sealed records to check the lab logs." "Which is exactly what you're not allowed to do," he replied, flicking on the wipers as they slid through the rain-washed streets. "So yeah, that's hacking, and that's a federal offense." Marie closed her eyes briefly, frustration and fear warring within her. In her late 20s, she'd been a dedicated data analyst for a large tech firm. By her 30s, she'd become known in certain circles for her uncanny ability to spot patterns and anomalies in massive data sets. Even as she turned 52 this past spring, the skill remained sharp as ever. She had never used that talent for wrongdoing. She only wanted to right injustices others had overlooked. Was that truly so terrible? Her mind churned, recalling the hours she'd spent poring over those logs, stumbling upon the discrepancy that showed the lab results had been altered. She told Harold Davis's defense lawyer, who promptly dismissed her as an overzealous conspiracy theorist. Then she tried the local press, who ignored her. Finally, she took a gamble by petitioning the court directly and found herself in handcuffs. She opened her eyes at the sound of the radio crackling. The officer picked up, mumbled something in official jargon, then shot Marie a careful side glance. "They want you at the federal building. Looks like you're not just in local trouble." Marie's stomach clenched, but she forced a weak half-smile. Figures. If there's one thing that always speeds up, it's red tape and bureaucracy, once you've crossed a certain line. They drove through the city, weaving past tall glass buildings that glinted in the rainy daylight. The scene blurred outside, a swirl of gray sky and countless commuter cars. Marie felt an odd mixture of dread and strange conviction. She'd never believed being locked up would be her fate, yet here she was, steeled by the knowledge she was right, even if everyone else thought she was wrong. Only when the cruiser turned into the underground parking of the Federal Building did she notice a pair of black SUVs tailing them. Her pulse quickened. Another complication? She tried to peer through the tinted windows of those vehicles behind them, but before she could glean more, the officer parked and stepped out, opening her door. "Let's go," he said. "Don't do anything rash. We'll get you processed." She followed, wrists still bound, into the cavernous parking garage. Her eyes automatically flicked around, searching for any path of escape, just reflex. She spotted the two SUVs gliding to a stop a short distance away. Men in suits, some armed, stepped out. Tension coiled in her gut. She had a feeling these men were not here on a courtesy call. The officer led her toward an elevator. Before they could reach it, a tall, dark-haired man in a black suit approached, flashing a federal badge. He had a carefully shaved face, unreadable eyes, and carried himself like someone used to having his way. "Officer," the man said, voice low and quiet but laced with authority. "I need Ms. Stone transferred to my custody." The officer frowned. "Under whose orders?" The man in black raised a brow. "Agent Caldwell, Special Investigations. You'll find the relevant forms have arrived at your station. I'm sure your superiors told you we'd be taking her off your hands." Begrudgingly, the officer nodded. He undid Marie's handcuffs. "Orders are orders. She's your problem now." He shot Marie a strangely sympathetic look, then turned on his heel and left, his footsteps echoing in the parking garage until he disappeared into a corridor. Marie rubbed her wrists. "What's going on? Why does a special investigations unit want me? I only looked at some lab logs." Agent Caldwell's thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's talk upstairs." She hesitated, but he placed a guiding hand on her back, urging her toward the elevator. Two others from the SUVs flanked them, both equally impassive, wearing the same dark suits. The group rode the elevator to the 10th floor in absolute silence, the hum of the machinery the only sound. Marie's heart pounded, but she kept her chin high. The elevator dinged, revealing a sterile hallway with bright, uncomfortably harsh lighting. They led her to a nondescript conference room, closed the door behind them, and gestured for her to sit at a metal table. One of the men posted himself by the door, arms crossed. Agent Caldwell sat across from her, tapping a pen on a thin folder. He spoke calmly, but the undercurrent of tension in his voice was impossible to miss. "Marie Stone, age 52, an independent data analyst with a background at Epsilon Tech, formerly in cybersecurity, left the job 10 years ago." He eyed her. "You've been quite busy in the last few months, yes?" Marie tried to keep her expression neutral. "If you mean trying to help an innocent man avoid prison, then yes, I have. What exactly led you to suspect that Harold Davis was framed?" She considered her words carefully. In the back of her mind, alarm bells were ringing. They didn't re-handcuff her, which might be a good sign, but their body language told her they weren't on her side. "I was browsing public court records for another research project and noticed an odd pattern in certain timestamps. It got me curious. I cross-checked them against the chain of custody logs for Mr. Davis's DNA samples." She paused. "It seemed impossible that those logs were correct. So I kept digging. The more I dug, the more I realized there was foul play." Agent Caldwell turned a page in the folder. "Then you, let me phrase this delicately, breach the protective layers in the system to gain deeper access. That's a felony in most circumstances." She nodded slowly, refusing to let guilt overshadow the truth. "Yes, but if we never question what's behind the curtain, we'll never uncover any misconduct. And let's not pretend every official is squeaky clean. Sometimes the law is used to hide the truth instead of reveal it." Caldwell's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing about that. "How did you manage to bypass the system's security?" Again, I worked cybersecurity for years at a major firm, she said, not boasting, simply stating a fact. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't impossible. A ghost of a smile crossed Caldwell's lips, as though he recognized skill. So, you found these logs that pointed to tampered DNA evidence. That's interesting. And you marched into the court to blow it all up this morning. His tone was half mocking, half impressed. Marie felt her heart twist. I did what I had to. They wouldn't listen any other way. Or so you say. Caldwell leaned back in his chair, studying her. The problem is, Miss Stone, in your quest to expose an injustice, you tripped an alert in the federal database. There's a reason certain records were sealed. There are other things in there, things with national security implications. She blinked. National security? That's surprising. We're talking about a common criminal case, right? His lips pressed together in a thin line. Not exactly. The corruption runs deeper than you think. And your sudden infiltration triggered a security response that indicated we have a bigger mess on our hands. For a few seconds, Marie just stared, trying to read the meaning behind his words. Was the Harold Davis case just a tiny piece of something enormous? She recalled the incongruities in the data, how it pointed to more than one set of altered results. But she didn't have enough time to pursue everything. She'd focused only on proving Davis was innocent. Now she realized there might be other anomalies connected to bigger names. She chose her next words carefully. So, is that why I was arrested so swiftly? Because I uncovered something that other people are afraid of? The door guard shifted, but Caldwell waved him down. Then he fixed Marie with a look that almost bordered on regret. It's complicated. Let's just say powerful individuals would prefer that certain truths remain buried. And you, Ms. Stone, have accidentally stumbled upon them. A ripple of dread and indignation moved through her. All I did was follow the data. If someone's tampering with criminal cases, falsifying DNA evidence, they should be the ones behind bars, not me, and certainly not Harold Davis. Caldwell sighed, rapping his pen against the folder again. You see, that's the challenge. It's never as simple as shining a light and expecting cockroaches to scatter. Some of these cockroaches have political clout and deep pockets. They can shift narratives instantly. Now the system is painting you as a cybercriminal, and once that label sticks, everything you say is suspect. Anger flared in her chest. Justice shouldn't be about who has the best PR campaign. It's about what's right. Agent Caldwell let the silence speak for itself for a moment. Then he tapped his folder. I can't promise you justice, Miss Stone, but I can tell you that you're not going back to that courthouse today. You'll be placed under protective custody, for your own safety. She froze. Protective custody? This is absurd. I have a life out there, and I have more evidence on my own devices. He cut her off with a raised hand. Your devices have been seized. We need to examine everything you've collected. The men who tried to arrest you in the courtroom? Let's just say not all of them are truly on the side of the law. If I let you walk out of this building, you'd be on the run, or in someone's crosshairs within the hour. A sick feeling settled into her stomach. She realized then that she might be in far greater danger than a trivial hacking charge. Something monstrous and invisible loomed behind these doctored DNA logs, and she'd inadvertently peeled back the corner of its disguise. By the way, Caldwell added, Harold Davis is still behind bars. If you ever hope to exonerate him, you may want to cooperate. We can't do anything about his case until we unravel the bigger scheme at play. Marie's mind spun as she weighed her next move. If she cooperated, she'd be giving up her independence, letting them confiscate her files, bury her in protective custody. But if she refused, she might never bring the truth to light. She remembered an old quote her grandfather used to say, "Better to fight for something than live for nothing." Steeling herself, she looked Agent Caldwell in the eye. I'll cooperate if that means saving an innocent man, but I want your word that you won't bury this. That when the time comes, You'll let me expose what's truly going on." For a long moment, Caldwell said nothing. Then he inclined his head. "You have my word." She didn't know if she believed him, but this was the only path forward. She gave a small nod. Somewhere she heard the faint thunder of trouble on the horizon, like a tidal wave far out at sea. She only prayed she could stand firm once it crashed down. The next few hours were a blur of forms, signatures, and relentless questioning. Eventually she found herself escorted to a dimly lit office with blinds drawn. They told her to wait. She sat in a worn leather chair, eyes drifting to the walls, lined with thick binders labeled Federal Investigations, Financial Crimes, Internal Affairs. So many layers, so many secrets. Eventually Caldwell reappeared, a file in hand. "We'll be moving you to a safe location," he said, not unkindly. "But first I want you to meet someone." Marie tensed. "Oh." He opened the door, and a figure stepped in, a woman in her late 40s with cropped auburn hair and a quiet, no-nonsense demeanor. Her name tag read Special Agent Miranda Ross. "Marie Stone," Ross said, extending a hand. "I've read your analysis. It's thorough, impressive. Honestly, I think you're right. The Davis conviction was a setup." Marie shook her hand, relief flooding her chest. Finally, someone who believed her outright. She studied the agent's face. Ross carried a slight wariness in her eyes, but also an earnest sincerity. She reminded Marie of the calm after a storm. Ross cleared her throat. "I want to bring you in on something, off the record for now. There's a pattern of compromised evidence in multiple cases. We suspect it's not just local corruption. It's part of a bigger operation involving highly placed officials." Caldwell leaned against the doorframe. "We think your discovery was just the tip of the iceberg." Marie nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. "So, how do I help?" Ross sighed. "First, we keep you safe, and second, we need you to replicate your data analysis on a different set of files. Ones we've had trouble decoding. If you can crack them, we might be able to see exactly who's orchestrating this fiasco, but it's risky. Because those people won't let me reveal what I find," Marie guessed. Ross nodded. "Precisely." Caldwell took a step forward. "Which is why we've arranged protective custody, an undisclosed house. You'll have a secure workstation. Ross will stay in contact, but you can't contact anyone. No phone calls, no internet aside from what we provide through a secure line. Agreed?" Marie's gaze flicked between them. She understood the stakes. She hated the idea of disappearing, but she hated even more the thought of letting an innocent man rot in prison, or letting others become victims of false convictions. So she set her shoulders and said, "Let's do it." The drive to the safe house happened at night, accompanied by the hum of the highway and the hum of tension in the bulletproof SUV. Marie stared out the window. Streetlights blurred like glowing orbs, passing in a rhythm that felt almost hypnotic. On either side, other federal vehicles flanked them, an armed convoy to protect one middle-aged data analyst who had stirred a hornet's nest. Ross was at the wheel, silent for most of the trip. Caldwell had stayed behind at headquarters. Marie found herself glancing occasionally at Ross, trying to read her guarded expression, but she gave no clues away. Eventually, Ross spoke softly. "You must be terrified." Marie paused, uncertain how to respond. She decided on honesty. "I'm not sure I'd call it terror, more like a big pit in my stomach telling me there's no going back. The life I had yesterday is gone, and I'm not sure what tomorrow looks like." Ross nodded, keeping her eyes on the road. "When I was younger, I tried to blow the whistle on a shady operation in my own department. I faced isolation, intimidation, threats. Sometimes it's your own you have to fear the most." She hesitated. "I'm not telling you this for pity. I'm telling you because I admire what you're doing." Marie swallowed. "Thank you. But all I really did was look closer. Look where no one wanted me to look." Ross glanced at her. "That alone can be a revolutionary act." They said little else until they turned onto a gravel path leading to a modest single-level house flanked by thick trees. The porch light was off, giving it a ghostly silhouette. Ross parked the SUV, scanning the surroundings. Two other vehicles pulled in behind them, shining headlights across the yard. Ross nodded to Marie. "This is it. We'll do a quick sweep, ensure it's secure." They climbed out, and agents from the other cars spread out, weapons drawn, checking every corner. After 5 minutes, a tall, broad man with a short beard emerged from around the side of the house. "All clear?" he said, nodding to Ross. Marie followed Ross inside. The interior was Spartan. Bare walls, simple furniture, a locked filing cabinet in the hall. It reminded Marie of an off-season vacation rental or maybe a government stash house. Oddly, it smelled faintly of pine. Ross led her to a small bedroom with nothing but a bed, a lamp, and one window. "This is yours for now. There's a desk in the living area for your analysis work. You'll have a secure laptop and a phone with limited access. No contact with the outside. Understood?" Marie nodded, an odd wave of loneliness washing over her. "Understood." Ross's gaze softened. "Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." With that, she left, closing the door gently. Marie sank onto the bed, the tension of the day crashing down on her like a boulder. In her tired mind, images of Harold Davis's anxious face drifted in and out. She'd met him once, briefly, at a hearing. A meek man, older than her, with watery eyes that begged for help. The idea that he was still in a prison jumpsuit somewhere, hopeless, filled her with renewed determination. She didn't bother changing out of her clothes. Sleep claimed her within minutes, the bed surprisingly comfortable in the midst of that stark, unknown space. She woke at dawn to the smell of coffee. Instinctively, she sat up, disoriented, mind racing. Where am I? Then it all flooded back, a wave of stark reality. She rose, washed her face in the small adjoining bathroom, and stepped into the living area. Ross stood in the kitchen corner, pouring coffee into a paper cup. She offered one to Marie. "It's not gourmet, but it'll do." Marie accepted the cup gratefully, savoring the warmth. The beep of a laptop on the desk caught her attention, a sleek device with an official government seal on the back. Next to it lay a thick manila envelope labeled "Confidential" for M. Stone. Ross set her own coffee down. "We've loaded the logs we need you to examine. In that envelope are also some partial transcripts. Start wherever you think best, but a word of caution. This data is flagged at the highest levels. If anything you find gets leaked incorrectly, we won't be able to protect you or the people involved." Marie nodded, heart thumping. She took a seat at the desk. She recognized some of the UI from her old cybersecurity days, though heavily modified. Her gaze flicked to Ross, who hovered behind her. "I'll be careful," Marie promised. Ross gave a curt nod. "I'm making a run for more supplies later, but I'll have an agent outside at all times. The passcode to log in is taped under the envelope. Take your time, but keep your eyes open." "Understood." Marie slid the envelope closer, opened it, and pulled out a short stack of documents. She gave Ross a small, determined smile. "Let's see what's buried beneath the surface." Ross left, and Marie began. She started by reviewing the data structure. They'd given her raw server logs, chain of custody details for multiple criminal cases, email exchanges between law enforcement officials, plus some cryptic references to numbered accounts. The complexity was daunting. Thousands upon thousands of lines, each requiring a meticulous eye. Yet for Marie, there was a familiar thrill in sorting through digital chaos to find that golden thread of wrongdoing. She inhaled, focusing on one case, State versus Helen Garcia. The defendant had been convicted on drug trafficking charges. According to these logs, evidence had been re-tagged 3 times, finalizing a chain of custody that pinned it firmly on Garcia. But the metadata revealed deeper layers. The original test results were inconclusive, then retested and flagged. The retest file timestamps had been overwritten with identical timestamps, a classic sign of tampering. "Here we go again," she murmured, heart pounding. "Someone systematically forging evidence in multiple cases." She kept digging. Another case, another. Each had suspicious patterns. She realized with a jolt that if this was happening in multiple jurisdictions, it couldn't be one lone officer or one incompetent lab technician. This was bigger, orchestrated. Time blurred. She hardly noticed when Ross left the house. She only dimly registered the lunch that an agent slid onto the kitchen counter. She was deep in the labyrinth, following each digital breadcrumb. The further she went, the clearer it became that certain groups of cases were manipulated in the same style, a pattern, like a signature left behind by whoever was orchestrating this fiasco. She paused only briefly, sipping cold coffee, feeling her pulse gallop. Tapping her pen on the desk, she recalled a quote from her father, "A chain is only as strong as its weakest link." This conspiracy was broad and cunning, but somewhere in that sea of logs had to be the weak link. The person who made a mistake, leaving a clue that could unravel the entire operation. She just had to find it. That afternoon, Ross returned with groceries. "How's it going?" Marie rubbed her temples. "I've identified a potential chain of 6 or 7 big cases that all have the same tampering signature. It might be linked to a single evidence management software plugin that local labs use." Ross inhaled sharply. "Can you trace the plugin's origin or developer?" "It's used widely," Marie replied, "but I've found a unique set of code markers that only appear in certain updates. Updates installed in labs that process these manipulated samples. If I keep cross-referencing, maybe I can pin down who authorized those software patches." Ross nodded, impressed. "Keep going. This is exactly the lead we need." Night fell again, and Marie's eyes burned with fatigue, but she pressed on. She saw glimpses of heartbreak in these files, names of defendants who might be innocent, records of families broken by false accusations. A swirl of sadness, anger, and resolve kept her going. Sometime past midnight, her laptop chimed. Unauthorized access attempt detected. She stiffened. The screen flickered, lines of code flashing before her. She typed in a quick response, trying to isolate the intrusion. It looked like someone was trying to break into the safe system from outside. She alerted Ross. Ross dashed into the room, hair mussed from sleep, a gun at her side. "What happened?" "Someone's hacking in, or at least they're trying," Marie said. "They're good. They found our IP or recognize the signals I'm sending as I analyze. Or maybe there's a hidden back door in these logs." Ross cursed under her breath, grabbed her phone, and called in the situation. "So they're on to us. Any idea who?" Marie typed furiously. "They're bouncing through multiple proxies. Can't get a direct trace, but I can attempt to firewall them." She paused, scanning lines of code. "Wait. Someone installed a remote script into these logs. A Trojan, basically. The second we open them, it pings a location out there." She looked up, alarmed. "We might have just flagged ourselves." Ross's expression turned grim. "We have to relocate, now. Pack your stuff. Let me get the team. Hurry." A surge of adrenaline nearly drowned Marie's exhaustion. She snatched her notes, stuffed them into a small backpack. She shut down the laptop, removed the drive with her partial findings, and joined Ross by the door, heart hammering. She could see outside through a small window, agents rushing to their cars in the dark yard, guns drawn, scanning the tree line. Flashlight beams danced across the property. Ross grabbed the car keys, motioning Marie to keep her head low. "Stay close." They slipped outside into the cool night. The moment Marie stepped onto the porch, her foot hitting the squeaky board, a single gunshot shattered the silence. She gasped, ducking down behind the porch railing. Ross flung herself down too, cursing. One of the agents shouted, returning fire. Muzzle flashes lit the yard like strobe lights. Marie's pulse thundered. This was no random scare tactic. They were under attack. Ross grabbed Marie's arm. "Follow me." They crawled along the porch, bullets whizzing overhead. Another agent dashed across the lawn and signaled for them. "Cars this way, we gotta move now," he yelled over the gunfire. Ross nodded to Marie. "Go. On 3. 1, 2, 3. They bolted, hunched low, sprinting across grass slick with nighttime dew. Shots rang out, some ricocheting off the gravel drive. Marie's chest burned, fear clawing at her throat. She forced her legs to keep going until they reached the SUV. Ross yanked the rear door open, practically shoved Marie inside. The agent jumped into the driver's seat, Ross in the passenger seat, and they tore out of there, tires screeching, dirt spraying. In the rearview mirror, Marie glimpsed dark silhouettes flitting among the trees, muzzle flashes popping. The other federal vehicles roared behind them, forming a convoy that pressed onto the main road. Another bullet pinged off the SUV's back panel, but they sped away, hearts hammering. Marriott clutched her backpack, panting. "They found us so fast. This is insane." Ross twisted to look at her. "Are you all right?" She nodded shakily. "I'm in one piece." The realization sank in. The people behind this conspiracy weren't just tampering with documents. They were prepared to kill to keep their secrets. "Hang on," the driver barked. He turned onto a highway, accelerating like a rocket. "We'll regroup at a fallback location." Ross grabbed the radio. "We need to coordinate. We lost at least 2 men behind. They're pinned." "Can't go back," the driver growled. "We'd be outnumbered." Mary closed her eyes for a second, her heart heavy with guilt. People were risking their lives because of what she'd uncovered. But she reminded herself that the real blame lay with those who orchestrated and perpetuated this corruption. After a tense 20-minute drive, they pulled off the highway into an abandoned service station. The other SUVs rolled in behind them, headlights flicking off. Marie could see the wide-eyed fear in some agents' faces as they emerged, recounting how the ambush had been brutal and precise, almost as if the attackers knew exactly where to strike. One agent with a bandaged arm cursed. "We can't stay in any official safe house. They'll track us again. Our comm lines might be compromised." Ross grimaced. "Then where do we go?" A new voice spoke up behind them, soft but authoritative. "To me." Marie turned. It was Agent Caldwell stepping out from an SUV they hadn't noticed. He still wore that impassive look, but there was something like anger in his eyes. "We have a private facility, off the grid. No official link, no trace. Follow me." Ross exchanged a glance with Marie, then gave Caldwell a curt nod. The caravan set off once more, deeper into the night, no longer traveling standard roads. Instead, they followed a winding route along old highways and unmarked dirt paths. The sense of danger pressed down on them like a thick fog. No one spoke as they finally arrived at a remote property, a large, barn-like structure, more metal than wood, with a battered fence around it. Tall grass rustled under the moonlight. Caldwell parked, signaled the others to spread out. Marie stepped onto the rough gravel. This place looked abandoned and eerie. Inside, the barn was unexpectedly modern. Generators, electric lights, a few crates. Caldwell showed them a back room where basic cots lined the walls, and a corner served as an impromptu command center with monitors and servers. "We set this up for off-the-books operations," he explained. "No official record of it. They shouldn't be able to trace us here, at least not quickly." Ross busied herself with equipment checks, assigning tasks to various agents. Marie watched in a daze. The day had been surreal, from court arrests to ambushes in the woods. She wondered how many people in her age group ever found themselves in such a whirlwind of conspiracies and bullets. Yet she felt no urge to run. Each close call fueled her need to see this through. Caldwell approached, voice low. "I heard you discovered a link to some software plug-in. Might that be our smoking gun?" Marie nodded, setting her backpack down. "I think so. If we can find out who commissioned it, or who financially backed it, we can follow the money. But I'll need a secure rig to keep analyzing. The laptop from the safe house might be compromised. Someone injected a Trojan? He gestured to the humming servers. You can use our system offline. We'll isolate any data you have so it can't phone home to the hackers. Perfect, she murmured. And so the night continued. She hunched over a borrowed workstation, cross-referencing patch logs, scanning lines of suspicious code, searching for transactions. Caldwell came and went, conferring with Ross and the other agents. The tension in the barn was palpable, as if at any moment the doors might burst open with armed intruders. After countless lines of text, Marie discovered a curious financial trail buried in the plugin's developer account. A shell corporation had paid for advanced coding features. That same shell corporation funneled money in and out from an entity named Harrowing Investments. She nearly gasped when she followed that thread further. Harrowing Investments was linked to Senator Howard McAdams, known publicly as a champion of law and order. Senator McAdams, a household name respected for his tough stance on crime, the shock froze Marie's brain for a beat. The puzzle fit. If McAdams or his associates were behind rigging evidence, they could manufacture convictions to uphold his record of being tough on criminals, or manipulate public fear for political gains. He'd also have the power to bury investigation. No wonder they'd come after her so viciously. Her hands trembled as she prepared a local file compiling the links: McAdams, Harrowing Investments, fraudulent software patches, tampered evidence. She needed to confirm this with more data, but the digital breadcrumbs pointed in one direction. She found Ross and Caldwell conferring by the monitors. Approaching quietly, she said, "I think I've identified a major player. You won't believe it." Their eyes snapped to her, urgent. She swallowed and held out the printout she'd made. "This leads to Senator Howard McAdams." Ross's face went pale. Caldwell hissed, "That's big. Very big. If you're right, we're facing a politician with near unlimited resources. McAdams has allies at every level of government, friends in high places." Marie nodded grimly. "Which explains everything. The falsified evidence, the carefully curated convictions, the reason someone tried to kill me. McAdams can't risk any trail leading back to him." Ross exhaled sharply. "We'll need more proof before we can bring a sitting senator down. A single money trail won't cut it in the political sphere." Caldwell's gaze flicked from Ross to Marie. "We do have something else. If there's a real whistleblower on the inside, some official or staffer who's seen the rigging, but we don't know who that might be." Marie stared at her printouts, mind whirling. "Or we could try to force the senator's hand. If we go public with partial evidence, we risk him using his connections to spin the narrative or bury us. But if we wait too long, he might cover his tracks." She rubbed her temples. Exhaustion nipped at her. "Is there a way to catch him off guard? Something like a televised event he can't control, or a setting where he can't just eliminate us without massive backlash?" Ross brightened. "An oversight hearing next week. McAdams is scheduled to testify on criminal justice reform. If we show up with a bombshell, we could corner him in a public setting. But getting in there without being intercepted, that's the challenge." Caldwell pursed his lips. "We'd need an ironclad plan. And we can't just barge in with allegations. We need conclusive proof, enough to force him out of any protective bubble. Plus a big audience, so he can't hush it up quietly." A memory sparked in Marie's mind of her confrontation with the judge. The shock on everyone's faces when she revealed the truth about the tampered DNA in open court. The public glare. The unstoppable wave of reaction once the cameras captured the moment. Maybe that was the approach. Shine the spotlight so brightly that even a powerful senator couldn't slip away. But that also meant risking everything if they tried to stop her beforehand. She thought of a quote from her father again, or maybe it was Winston Churchill. "If you're going through hell, keep going." "Yes," she whispered to herself. "We keep going." Ross and Caldwell waited, unsure what she was pondering. Finally, Marie cleared her throat, meeting their eyes. "Let's gather everything. Every tampered case, every lab infiltration. Then we'll call a press conference at the hearing. Not some quiet approach with hush-hush motions. No time for that. We drop it all in front of the media. Once it's out, the senator can't bury it. And if something happens to us, the data remains public. Ross swallowed. That's dangerous. He'll try to stop us. Caldwell put a hand on his holster. We'll ensure your safety, Miss Stone. Marie's stomach knotted with a strange mixture of resolve and fear. Then it's settled. We go all in. The barn lights flickered. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the metal walls. An omen, perhaps, of the storm to come. The following days felt like a game of cat and mouse. Caldwell, Ross, and the other agents worked tirelessly, setting up a rotating watch so they wouldn't be caught off guard. Marie pored over the data in the makeshift command center, building a meticulous case that showed a pattern of manipulated evidence linking back to Harrowing Investments and, by extension, Senator McAdams. Information continued to pour in from Caldwell's contacts. Anonymous tips about the senator's staff quietly transferring funds into overseas accounts. One ex-lab employee from across the country reached out, claiming she was fired for questioning suspicious logs. A mosaic of testimonies, all painting McAdams as orchestrator of a web of corruption. Marie's heart lurched each time a new message arrived, detailing yet another family torn apart by false convictions. She recognized Harold Davis's name among them, a small line in a sea of tragedies. But it kept her going. If they succeeded, Davis and many others would finally see justice. On the eve of the hearing, Caldwell and Ross huddled with Marie to finalize their plan. The hearing would take place at a large congressional hall. Cameras would be present, reporters everywhere. McAdams would step up to champion his reforms. That's when they'd present their evidence, live. They'd have minimal backup, though, hard to trust official channels. Caldwell had a handful of agents he believed were loyal, plus Ross. The rest he feared might be compromised. Before dawn, they packed up the barn. Each ally wore a grim face. They knew the risk was high. But the sense of purpose was unshakable. Without it, there'd be only fear. They split into separate vehicles to avoid drawing attention. Marie rode with Ross, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. An ominous quiet filled the car as they wound their way to the city. The approach was timed to slip into the building shortly before the hearing started, hopefully avoiding detection by McAdams's watchers. At 8 a.m. they arrived at the back entrance of the massive stone edifice that housed the hearing rooms. Marble columns rose in stately grandeur, the American flag snapping in the breeze. Crowds of staffers and visitors milled about, unaware that a political time bomb was about to detonate. Ross parked in a side lot, gesturing for Marie to keep her head down. They walked in, blending with a small group of employees. Caldwell was somewhere else, coordinating from inside. Marie clutched her briefcase containing an external drive loaded with all the data. She felt a momentary pang, fear that they might not make it to the hearing room in one piece. They entered the hallway. The bustle of staffers parted around them. For an instant, Marie relaxed. So far, so good. Then, from behind, she heard a shout, "Marie Stone!" Ross whirled, hand near her weapon. Marie turned to see a tall figure in a dark suit, barreling toward them with two others in tow. Not Caldwell. These men looked official, but their eyes glinted with cold purpose. One reached inside his jacket. Ross hissed, "Run!" They sprinted down the corridor. Bystanders gasped, scattering. The men gave chase, footsteps pounding. Marie's lungs burned. Ross led the way, weaving through hallways, searching for an entry to the hearing chamber. Shots rang out, screams followed, bullets punched holes in the walls. Marie's heart leapt into her throat. So they didn't care about subtlety anymore. McAdams' goons or some faction loyal to him, openly firing in a government building, that meant desperation. They had to get to the hearing, expose him before they were silenced for good. A side corridor came into view, lined with tall double doors. Ross pushed through them. Marie stumbled after, nearly tripping on the hem of her coat. Another shot rang out, splintering wood near her shoulder. She bit back a scream. "Keep going! Keep going!" If they caught her, it was over. They burst into a wide carpeted foyer leading to the hearing room. Security guards were posted there. At the sight of armed pursuit, the guards drew their weapons, barking orders. A standoff erupted. The men behind Marie hesitated, not wanting to be pinned by official security. Seizing the chance, Ross tugged Marie forward. They reached the next set of doors. Beyond those doors lay the bright lights of a major public hearing, cameras rolling, senators in session. The best place to shine the truth. Ross shoved open the doors. Dozens of heads turned to stare as two women, one in a slightly disheveled suit, the other trembling with adrenaline, slammed inside. Lights from cameras glared. The senator's dais loomed at the far end of the grand hall, and there, at the central podium, stood Senator Howard McAdams, impeccably dressed, delivering a speech about the importance of restoring faith in our justice system. He recognized Mary instantly. His practiced politician's smile flickered. His eyes narrowed with a seething anger just barely contained. Chaos broke out. Some aides rushed forward, security guards followed, but the cameras were rolling, reporters craning, the audience whispering. Marie's mouth felt dry. She saw Caldwell among the crowd, signaling her to step forward. She took a shaky breath and did so, ignoring the startled gasps. Ross stood by her side, hand on her weapon, as if daring anyone to come closer. McAdams mustered a tight, condescending grin. "Good morning, Miss Stone, is it? I'd suggest you calm yourself. You appear quite agitated. This is an official hearing." The subtext was plain. He wanted to dismiss her as some unhinged intruder. She saw behind his mask the man who had orchestrated so much. She took one more breath, and in the hush of the hall she said, voice loud and clear, "Senator McAdams, I have proof that you and your associates have systematically falsified evidence in multiple criminal cases across the country." An explosion of gasps, camera flashes, the hearing chairman banged his gavel, demanding order. McAdams scoffed. "This is absurd. Guards, please escort Miss Stone out." But security hesitated. The cameras were fixed on Marie. Removing her by force in front of the entire press corps would create a bigger scandal. She pressed on. "I have data linking Harrowing investments to a software plugin used to manipulate DNA test results, implicating innocent people in crimes they did not commit. And that shell company leads back to you, Senator." She raised the external drive. "The logs, the financial trails, the chain of custody documents, everything is here." Reporters scrambled, shouting questions. A wave of tension seized the audience. Live broadcasts were capturing every second. McAdams' face contorted with rage. He tried a politician's tactic, forcing a dismissive laugh. "Ridiculous! Utterly baseless allegations from a self-proclaimed cyber expert who's under investigation herself for hacking into government systems. Why should anyone believe you?" Someone from the panel asked, "Is that true, Miss Stone? Have you illegally accessed federal databases?" She straightened, ignoring the tremble in her hands. "Yes, I did it, because no one else would look at the evidence I uncovered. Because an innocent man named Harold Davis was sentenced to prison on falsified DNA results. Because this conspiracy was being protected at high levels. Had I followed normal channels, it would have been buried. But that doesn't negate the facts. This is the truth, documented. If I'm lying, Senator McAdams has nothing to fear from letting the media see this data." More cameras clicked. One of the panel members said, "Let us see it then. Show the evidence." McAdams barked, "This hearing is not a circus. I refuse." But it was too late. Caldwell, who had positioned himself at the side of the dais, stepped forward with a laptop hooked to the hearing room's projector. He inserted Marie's drive, and in an instant, a large screen behind the dais lit up, displaying a myriad of logs, spreadsheets, and transaction records. They scrolled through pages of suspicious code manipulations, dollar amounts funneled through Harridan investments, each line more damning than the last. A hush fell over the chamber. People stared, transfixed by the raw, undeniable evidence beaming right into their faces. McAdams clenched his fists. This data is stolen. It's manipulated. This is not a legitimate demonstration. One of the senior senators peered at the screen, eyes wide. That money trail. We're seeing direct transfers to your campaign accounts, Senator McAdams, under different corporate names. How do you explain that? McAdams' face flushed. This is obviously the work of a malicious hacker. I have no knowledge of these transactions. But the sweat on his brow betrayed him. The cameras zoomed in on every twitch of his face. Marie took the moment to hammer in the final nail. And here, you can see the ID references for labs that processed DNA samples. In your so-called crime crackdown pilot program, this is the repeated tampering that led to at least 12 known false convictions, possibly more. My hope is that with this data, new investigations will begin immediately. The hush broke into pandemonium. Reporters shouted questions, spectators thronged forward, the chairman demanded security restore order, but the story was out. Headlines would read, "Corruption exposed in public hearing, Senator McAdams linked to falsified evidence scheme," and so on. McAdams pointed a shaking finger at Marie. "You'll regret this," he whispered, lips barely moving. She could see real hatred in his eyes. This was a man who had grown used to unchallengeable power. Being cornered publicly was a new humiliation he didn't know how to handle. Yet the system, under the public's glare, moved swiftly. Agents, those Caldwell had mustered, stepped up to McAdams, showing official orders. The entire hearing was suspended. The senator stood, flabbergasted, as they placed him in handcuffs. He tried to speak, but words tumbled incoherently. Cameras captured everything, beams of flash reflecting off the metal cuffs around his wrists. A collective gasp from the audience signaled the unbelievable had just happened. A sitting senator arrested, mid-hearing, on live TV. As they let him out, he muttered something at Marie, a final threat she couldn't quite hear. But his glare left no doubt. This fight wasn't over in his mind. Yet in that moment, it didn't matter. She had done it. They had done it. The truth was out. She exhaled a shaky breath, feeling her knees almost give way. Ross steadied her, murmuring, "You were brilliant." Marie allowed herself a small, weary smile. Now maybe Harold Davis can finally go free. The next hours and days spun in a whirlwind of interviews, official statements, and the unraveling of a far-reaching scandal. Media outlets clamored for more details. They replayed the footage of Senator McAdams being cuffed on the hearing floor. Federal prosecutors launched a major investigation, revealing the entire ring of associates, staffers, corrupt lab technicians, even some high-ranking officials in the justice system, who had profited from falsifying cases. Mary Stone, once labeled a cybercriminal, now found herself heralded in the headlines as a whistleblower who sacrificed her safety to expose the truth. Some corners of the political world still spat her name, calling her methods unethical, but the tide of public opinion was largely on her side. Eventually, she stood at a press briefing with Caldwell and Ross behind her. One reporter asked, "Miss Stone, how do you feel about the danger you placed yourself in to reveal this? Was it worth it?" She thought of Harold Davis, released just the day before and reunited with his family. She nodded. "I'd do it all again, because injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Sometimes it takes ordinary people looking closer at the details no one else will. That's how you shine the light." Afterward, Ross pulled her aside. "The official stance is that you still broke some hacking laws, but the DOJ has decided not to prosecute. You'll probably have to testify at McAdams' trial, though." Marie offered a faint smile. "Testify I can handle. Prison, not so much." They shared a moment of camaraderie. Ross gave a soft laugh. I guess this means you're free. What will you do now? Marie looked around the buzzing press area. She closed her eyes briefly, inhaling. I might just go home and start living my life again. But if I see another injustice that no one's investigating... She trailed off with a knowing smile. Ross nodded knowingly. Sometimes the call to do what's right never really stops. But you deserve rest. Take it. You earned it. Nearby, Caldwell wrapped up a conversation with another official. He approached them. Miss Stone, you're free to go. And if you ever feel an itch to help us track down more corruption behind the scenes, let me know. You have a knack. She gave him a tired grin. Thanks. I'll keep that in mind. He extended his hand. She shook it, a handshake of mutual respect forged in crisis. Then, turning on her heel, she walked outside. The sun was out, bright and warm against her face. A new day, in more ways than one. A small crowd of journalists lingered, hoping for one more quote, but she politely excused herself, weaving past them. She reached the sidewalk, where life bustled as usual, people on lunch breaks, traffic humming. And for the first time in a while, she felt a quiet sense of peace. She'd exposed the truth, helped free an innocent man, and brought down a powerful figure. That was enough for now. She remembered another quote from her father. Truth is like the sun. You can shut it out for a while, but it ain't going away. She smiled at the sky. Indeed, the sun was shining stronger than ever. She headed home, letting the warmth fill her bones. Maybe tomorrow she'd start a garden, or visit her siblings upstate. She hadn't decided yet. But this time the choice was hers to make. Freely, without the crushing weight of secrets or fear. And that was a freedom more precious than she ever realized. In the days and weeks that followed, the McAdams scandal unraveled at high speed. More arrests ensued, more convictions overturned. Some news outlets dubbed it the Stone Revolution, though Marie found that label almost comical. She was just a middle-aged analyst with a knack for reading between the lines. Still, if it helped raise awareness of the cracks in the system, she welcomed it. Harold Davis was officially exonerated. Marie met him outside the prison gates. He broke down in tears, thanking her repeatedly. His family insisted on throwing her a small celebration. She accepted, standing in their cozy living room, among neighbors and friends moved by their gratitude. This was the direct, human face of her efforts. A man reunited with loved ones, free again. She shared quiet conversation with Davis, who told her he planned to sue for wrongful conviction, not out of greed, but to hold accountable those who nearly destroyed his life. She supported him wholeheartedly. Go get them, she urged. Don't let them forget. After that, she tried to slip back into normalcy. The local TV stations sometimes asked her to comment on data security or ethics in law enforcement. She politely declined most offers. She was no celebrity. She craved an ordinary day where she could read a book on her porch, sip tea. But every so often the phone rang and she recognized Ross's calm voice or Caldwell's clipped tone, little hints that some officials were still in the shadows, trying to salvage remnants of the conspiracy. The wheels of justice turned slowly, but they were turning. No black SUVs came for her anymore, no gunshots in the night. For now, she could breathe. Yet beneath that sense of closure lay a deep reflection on what had transpired. Power corrupts, especially when hidden behind layers of bureaucracy. Truth is fragile, requiring courage to champion it. And sometimes courage doesn't come from youth or physical might. It comes from a willingness to stand up and say enough is enough, even when your hair is streaked with gray and your knees ache. Late one evening, Marie sat on her small backyard deck, gazing at the moonlight shimmering on the lawn. She thought about the entire Odyssey. A line from a favorite author drifted through her mind. It is never too late to be what you might have been. She smiled, sipping her chamomile tea. She had been many things in her life. A data analyst, an office worker, a mild-mannered neighbor. Now she could add whistleblower and champion of the innocent to the list. And in that, she found something akin to peace. A few weeks later, local headlines blared about the ongoing McAdams trial. Marie was called in to testify as an expert witness in front of a new judge. Courtrooms no longer unnerved her the way they once did. She stepped to the stand with her collected files, unwavering in her testimony. The defense attorneys tried to rattle her, paint her as a vigilante hacker. She calmly detailed how she discovered the anomalies, the chain of custody manipulations, the money trail. In the gallery, she spotted Harold Davis quietly cheering her on. She spotted Ross, too, offering a nod of solidarity. From behind bulletproof glass, Senator McAdams stared at Marie with simmering hatred. But no matter how fierce his glare, it couldn't erase the mountain of evidence stacked against him. The judge listened carefully. Days of arguments unfolded. When the verdict finally came, the gavel fell. Guilty on multiple counts, from corruption to conspiracy to defraud the justice system, news cameras flashed. McAdams reeled, launching into a rant about conspiracies against him, but no one listened. He was led away in cuffs, a fallen titan of politics. Mary exhaled. Justice had taken another step forward. Outside, reporters mobbed her, microphones thrust in her face. "Miss Stone, how do you feel now that the senator is convicted?" She gave a measured answer. "Relieved. But remember, this isn't just about one man. It's about an entire system that allowed corruption to flourish. We have to stay vigilant so it doesn't happen again." Amid the swirling chaos, she spotted Ross approaching, smiling gently. They fell in step together, away from the cameras. Ross handed her a piece of paper. "Here's my personal contact. If you ever need anything, or if you stumble on another case you can't ignore, call me." Marie accepted it, grateful. "Thank you." Then she paused. "What about you? Are you heading back to your usual duties?" Ross shrugged. "There is plenty to clean up. I'll be around." They parted ways under the midday sun. Even though a massive chapter had closed, Marie felt the echoes of it all around her. She'd made a difference. Maybe not a complete fix, but a dent in the armor of corruption, and that was enough reason to walk with her head held high. Months passed. Harold Davis's case prompted a sweeping review of convictions that might have been tainted by the same software plugin. An entire wave of rightful exonerations began. Some states replaced their evidence management systems, spurred on by public outcry. Politicians distanced themselves from McAdams, claiming ignorance of his misdeeds. Mary found herself occasionally answering calls from attorneys or judges who wanted her insight on digital evidence. She rarely charged a fee. She was content to volunteer, to pass along the lessons she'd learned. Sometimes, older folks in her neighborhood recognized her from the news. They'd say, "You're that lady who took down the senator." She'd blush, insisting she was just someone who happened to look closer at the data. Still, a new sense of purpose glowed within her. She'd become living proof that change didn't require special titles or youthful bravado. It required only determination, skill, and the willingness to speak out, no matter the odds. One quiet weekend she sat in her living room, reading a printed letter from a stranger, a mother whose son had been wrongfully convicted in a similar case, now freed. The letter thanked Marie for inspiring them to keep fighting. Tears prickled in Marie's eyes. This, more than any official recognition, made her journey worthwhile. As if on cue, her phone buzzed. She picked it up. "Miss Stone," said a hesitant female voice. "I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Julia Palmer. I don't know if you can help, but I think I found some inconsistencies in my husband's trial, and no one's listening to me." Marie leaned forward. A surge of empathy filled her. "All right, Julia, tell me everything, from the beginning." Maybe she wouldn't dive back into the lion's den at the same scale, but she could at least guide someone else, help them navigate the labyrinth of data. The fight for justice never truly ended, and she wasn't the type to ignore a cry for help, especially now that she knew how to hear it. After the call, she made a few notes, cross-referenced the details. Julia's case sounded disturbingly familiar. She sighed, feeling that old determination stir. Another puzzle, another search for truth. She stood, walking to her modest home office, booting up her personal computer. "Let's see," she murmured under her breath, "what the data says this time." Outside her window, the afternoon sun sank lower, casting long shadows on the street, but inside a quiet light glowed across her desk. She typed, analyzing lines of text and numbers. A small smile quirked her lips, remembering something her grandfather used to say, "The world won't get better on its own. Sometimes it needs someone stubborn enough to force it." "Yes," she thought, chuckling softly, "I suppose I'm still that stubborn, and maybe that's exactly what's needed." In the end, a few final words must be shared for those reading this tale, especially those in the later seasons of life who might wonder if they too can still make a difference. Consider the wisdom gleaned from Marie Stone's path. Never underestimate the power of your expertise, no matter how old you are. The quiet accumulation of skills can become a sword against injustice when wielded with courage. Never assume that truth is the sole province of the powerful or the influential. Often, it's the overlooked person who sees what others choose to ignore. Never forget that standing up for what's right will bring danger and sacrifice, yet, as the saying goes, better to fight for something than live for nothing. And finally, justice isn't about grand gestures alone, it's about persistence. Every data log you check, every inconsistency you highlight, every question you dare to ask can become a key that unlocks someone else's freedom. In our collective journeys, we might recall another timeless quote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Whether you're 20 or 70, if you see an injustice and have the means to challenge it, the world needs your voice. As Marie Stone learned, it's never too late to ignite change with the spark of truth.